It started on a Tuesday morning, the kind that felt too quiet for the middle of the week. The sky was overcast, a dull gray pressing low over the neighborhood. I'd been awake since before dawn, tossing around in bed, unable to shake off a restless feeling. Around 7, I gave up on trying to sleep and decided to make coffee. As I stood by the kitchen window, waiting for the kettle to boil, my eyes wandered over the backyard. The grass was wet from last night's rain, shining faintly in the weak light. Everything looked normal, familiar. But then, by chance, I looked up. That's when I saw it. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The roof of my house was sloped, the kind of roof where fallen branches sometimes get caught. For a second, I thought maybe a large piece of wood had blown up there during the storm, but the shape was wrong, too rounded, too heavy. I squinted, pressing my forehead to the glass, and my stomach twisted. It was a body. A man, lying flat on his back, arms bent awkwardly at his sides, one leg twisted as though broken. His clothes were soaked through, dark patches where the rain had settled. From this distance, I couldn't make out his face. I froze. The kettle clicked behind me, but I didn't move. My first thought was that I had to be mistaken. There was no way a body was just lying on the roof of my house. Maybe it was a mannequin? A prank? Something left there by teenagers? But the longer I stared, the less it looked like anything else. The stillness, the weight of it, it was real. I could feel it in my chest. I didn't even remember grabbing my phone. One moment my hands were empty, the next I was dialing 911, my voice trembling as I told them, "There's a man on my roof. He's not moving. I think he's dead." The dispatcher's voice was calm, steady, asking questions I could barely answer. Was I alone? Had I touched the body? How long had I known it was there? My words came out in fragments. I couldn't stop glancing back at the window, half expecting the man to sit up at any moment. Within 10 minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up outside, lights flashing red and blue against the wet pavement. Neighbors stepped out of their houses, arms folded against the cold, craning their necks to see what was happening. I stood on the porch, waiting, hugging myself like I was freezing. An officer approached, tall and broad-shouldered, and asked me to step aside. They brought out a ladder, climbed onto the roof, and confirmed what I already knew. It was a body. A man in his 40s, maybe older. Pale, cold, dead. The officers asked me questions right there in the yard, their pens scratching quickly across their notepads. My words sounded strange to me, like they were coming from someone else. I told them I had no idea how he got there. I didn't know who he was. I had never seen him before in my life. But their faces didn't change. They didn't look surprised. They didn't even look confused. They just nodded, glanced at each other, and then one of them said something that made my stomach drop. "Sir, we're going to need you to come with us." Before I could process what that meant, they turned me around and slipped cold metal cuffs around my wrists. My neighbors across the street stopped whispering and stared openly now. The flashing lights lit up their faces as I was led toward the patrol car. I kept repeating the same words over and over, like they might change something. "I didn't do this. I don't know him. I didn't put him there." But no one answered. The last thing I saw before the car door closed behind me was the man's body being lifted from the roof. His arms swung limply, like a broken puppet. And even then, even though I knew he was dead, I couldn't stop looking at his face. Because for the briefest second, I thought, just thought, I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. The inside of the patrol car smelled faintly of old vinyl and disinfectant. My hands were cuffed tightly behind me, my shoulders aching from the awkward angle. Rain streaked down the back window, blurring the houses as we pulled away. I couldn't stop watching the second car behind us, the one carrying the body. It was covered with a black tarp, strapped down on a stretcher in the back of a van. Every turn we made, every stop at a light, I craned my neck to keep sight of it. I kept telling myself he was dead. That's what the police said. That's what logic said. But the image of his face, slack and pale, wouldn't leave me. And worse, there was that flicker I couldn't get out of my head, a twitch at the corner of the mouth, a fraction of movement that felt impossible to explain. The officer driving said almost nothing. The radio crackled with static and dispatch chatter, but otherwise the silence pressed down on me like a weight. Finally, I cleared my throat and asked the only question that mattered. Why am I under arrest? The officer's eyes flicked to the mirror, catching mine. His voice was flat, practiced. Standard procedure. Body shows up on your property, we bring you in. Questions need answering. But I didn't. My voice cracked. I didn't put him there. I don't even know who he is. He didn't respond, just kept driving, hands steady on the wheel, face unreadable. We turned off the main road, heading toward the highway. The rain had lightened, but the sky was still heavy, the clouds low and dark. Traffic hissed past on wet asphalt. Then it happened. At a red light, the patrol car stopped, and for the first time, the van carrying the body pulled up close enough that I could see through the back window. The tarp had shifted slightly during the ride. One pale hand had slipped out from beneath it, the fingers hanging limp. My stomach turned. I couldn't look away. And then, as the brake lights ahead glowed red, I saw it, clear as day. The man's eyes blinked, just once, a slow, heavy flutter of the lids. I lurched forward against the seatbelt, my wrists straining painfully against the cuffs. "Did you see that?" I shouted. My voice was too loud, panicked. His eyes, he just blinked. The officer's head turned sharply, his brows knitting together. "What are you talking about?" "The body." My chest heaved as I tried to explain, words tumbling out too fast. In the van, his eyes just opened and shut. He's not dead. But when I whipped my head back toward the window, the hand was gone. The tarp covered him completely again, smooth and still. The light turned green, and the van pulled forward. I pressed my face against the glass, desperate for another glimpse, but the distance grew too quickly. The officer exhaled sharply, like he was already tired of me. "You need to calm down. Shock does things to people, makes them see things that aren't there." "I know what I saw," I muttered, more to myself than him. My mouth felt dry. My heart wouldn't slow down. For the rest of the drive, I sat rigid in the seat, staring at the wet streaks on the window. Every time the radio hissed or the tires hit a patch of water, I jumped. I couldn't shake the image of that blink. Not a spasm, not a trick of the light. It was too deliberate. We pulled into the lot of the police station. The building loomed squat and gray, fluorescent lights buzzing from tall poles. As they opened the door and guided me inside, I caught one last look at the van pulling around back toward the service entrance. I swear I saw the tarp shift again, just slightly, as if something underneath it had drawn in a breath. The fluorescent lights inside the station felt harsh after the gray rain outside. They buzzed faintly overhead, the kind of sound you don't notice right away but soon becomes impossible to ignore. My wrists were uncuffed once I was led into an interview room, 4 pale walls, a metal table, 2 plastic chairs, and nothing else. The officer who'd driven me in left without a word. The door shut behind him with a heavy click. I was alone. The air in the room smelled faintly of coffee and something metallic, maybe the table itself. I rubbed my wrists where the cuffs had been, red marks wrapped around them like bruises waiting to form. My reflection stared back at me from the glossy tabletop, pale, drawn, unsettled. I don't know how long I sat there before the door opened again. Another officer stepped in, this one older, with thinning hair and a tired expression. He carried a notepad tucked under one arm. "Mr. Collins," he said, settling into the chair across from me. His voice was calm, but not warm, more like someone reading instructions out loud. "I'm Detective Harris. I'll be asking you some questions." I nodded automatically, though my throat was too tight to speak. He flipped open the notepad, clicked a pen. "You reported a body on the roof of your home. Tell me, in your own words, how you discovered it." I recited what I'd already told the dispatcher. The kettle, the window, the shock of seeing the shape lying there. I tried to keep my voice steady, but every sentence came out broken, uneven. "Did you hear anything unusual during the night?" Harris asked. "Footsteps, movement on the roof, sounds outside?" "No," I said quickly. "Nothing. I couldn't sleep, but I didn't hear anything." "Do you know the deceased?" I shook my head. "I've never seen him before. I don't even know how he got up there." Harris scribbled notes, not looking at me. His pen scraped loudly against the paper. "Neighbors said you were awake around midnight. Lights were on in your kitchen. What were you doing?" I I don't remember the exact time, I stammered. But I was awake, yeah. I made tea, watched something on my laptop. I wasn't outside. His eyes flicked up to me then, sharp and measuring. You live alone, correct? Yes. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Then he asked, Why do you think the body was on your roof? I blinked at him. I don't know. I told you, I don't know him. But roofs are not places bodies just appear, he said. Somebody put him there. Either he climbed himself and fell, or someone carried him up. Which do you think it was? My skin prickled. The way he said someone carried him up sent a chill down my spine. I don't know, I whispered. Harris tapped his pen against the table. You seem nervous. Of course I'm nervous, I snapped, louder than I meant to. My voice bounced off the small room's walls. There was a dead man on my roof this morning. Now I'm sitting in here like I killed him. Wouldn't you be nervous? Harris didn't flinch. He just kept watching me with that unreadable stare. Finally, he closed his notepad. We'll be running fingerprints and checking the deceased against missing persons. In the meantime, you're not under arrest, but you're not free to go either. My stomach dropped. So what does that mean? It means you stay put until we know more. He stood and opened the door. Someone will bring you water. And then he was gone. The room felt colder suddenly. I rubbed my arms, trying to warm myself, but it didn't help. My mind kept circling back to the van, to the hand dangling out from beneath the tarp, to that impossible blink. I didn't imagine it. I couldn't have. I was still replaying it in my head when I noticed something odd. The air vent in the corner above the door rattled softly, though no air was blowing through it. The sound was faint, irregular, like tapping. Tap, pause. Tap, tap. I froze, my eyes locked on the vent. The noise stopped, leaving only the hum of the lights. I tried to convince myself it was just the building settling, metal expanding and contracting. But then faintly, I heard something else through the vent. A voice, low, hoarse, whispering. You saw me. I shoved my chair back so hard it screeched against the floor. My pulse thundered in my ears. The room was empty. Just me, the table, the chair, the locked door. But the voice had been real. I wasn't imagining it. I stood there shaking, staring at the vent, waiting for it to come again. And it did. I'm not dead. I stood frozen in that interview room, my eyes locked on the vent above the door. The words echoed in my head, even though the sound had already faded. I'm not dead. For a long moment, I didn't move. My breath came shallow, each inhale catching in my throat. I wanted to scream for the detective, bang on the door, anything. But part of me couldn't. If I acknowledged it out loud, then it was real. A sharp metallic rattle made me jump. The doorknob twisted, and the door opened. A young officer stepped in carrying a small plastic cup of water. His face was bored, detached, like this was just another routine chore. You good? He asked, setting the cup on the table. I didn't answer right away. My eyes flicked from him to the vent, then back. Did you hear that? He frowned. Hear what? The voice, from the vent. He stared at me like I'd just spoken another language. It's an air duct. Sometimes it makes noise. Relax. And then he was gone again, leaving me alone with the cup of water and the buzzing lights. I sank back into the chair, gripping the edges of the table until my knuckles ached. The water sat untouched. I couldn't take my eyes off it, because when he'd set it down, I swear the surface rippled, as if something had exhaled across it. I don't know how long I sat like that, waiting for something else to happen. Time lost shape inside those pale walls. Finally, the door opened again. This time, it was Detective Harris. He didn't sit. He stood just inside the doorway, flipping through the papers in a manila folder. We ran prints on the deceased, he said, his tone clipped. Name's David Harker, age 43. He's been missing for 5 days. Report filed by his sister. Lives 2 towns over. I swallowed hard. The name meant nothing to me. I told you, I don't know him. Harris studied me for a long moment, his eyes sharp. Autopsy will confirm time and cause of death. Until then, you'll need to remain available. Available? I repeated. You make it sound like I can just walk out of here." He didn't answer. Instead, he tapped the folder against his thigh, almost absently, then added, "For what it's worth, Harker's body was found in unusual condition." Something in his voice made me sit up straighter. "What do you mean?" Harris's gaze lingered on me, weighing whether to continue. Finally, he said, "No external injuries. No obvious cause of death, but his eyes." He trailed off, flipping the folder closed. "Forget it. We'll know more soon." He left without another word, but I couldn't forget it, not when he'd said his eyes. I leaned forward, pressing my palms against my forehead, trying to steady myself. But then I heard it again, the faint rattle of the vent. This time, I didn't look up. I didn't want to, because I could already feel it. A breath, just barely, brushing across the top of my head, though the vent was several feet away. The whisper came again, so close it felt like it was inside the room, not above it. "They think you did this." My stomach clenched. I looked up despite myself. The vent was just a dark square, the faintest trace of dust, clinging to the slats. Nothing unusual. And then I saw it. A shadow shifted behind the vent. Not large, just a flicker. A darker patch in the darkness, but it was moving. I stumbled backwards so fast the chair toppled behind me. My heart hammered against my ribs. The whisper came again, drawn out, almost playful. "But you know the truth." I pressed myself against the far wall, eyes glued to the vent. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My voice had dried up completely. A key rattled in the lock. The door opened. Detective Harris stepped in again, this time with another officer at his side. They both froze when they saw me pressed against the wall, my chair overturned, my face pale. "What the hell happened in here?" Harris demanded. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. I pointed a shaking hand at the vent. They followed my gesture. The other officer frowned. "What about it?" "There was..." My voice cracked. Someone was in there. I heard them. I saw... But the vent was empty. Just a dark metal grate with nothing behind it. Harris's expression hardened, like a mask sliding into place. "You need rest, Mr. Collins. Someone will escort you to holding until we sort this out." I wanted to argue, to insist I wasn't imagining things, but when I glanced back at the vent one last time, I saw it. So quick, I almost doubted it. Two pale eyes, wide open, watching me, and then they were gone. The holding cell was colder than the interview room, and quieter too. They walked me down a narrow corridor lined with heavy steel doors, each one fitted with a small rectangular window. Most of the cells were empty, their lights off, but every few doors, I caught glimpses of other figures inside. Men slouched on bunks, eyes down, faces lost in shadows. When they led me into mine, the officer barely glanced at me. He unlocked the door, guided me in, then shut it with a heavy clang. The lock slid into place with a sound that felt far too final. The room itself was bare. A narrow metal bench ran along one wall, bolted down. The floor was concrete, stained in places from God knows what. A single dim bulb flickered in a caged fixture above, buzzing faintly. The air smelled like bleach and something sour beneath it. I sat on the bench, folding my arms across my chest, trying to steady myself. But the silence pressed on me like a weight. No footsteps, no voices, just the faint hum of the lights. For a while, nothing happened. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined everything, the voice in the vent, the eyes, even the blink in the van. Stress does strange things. Maybe that's all this was. Maybe when I got out of here, it would all make sense. But then I noticed something strange. The cell door had a small rectangular window covered with a mesh screen. On the other side of it, the corridor stretched into dimness. I'd glanced out once or twice just to see if an officer was walking by. Now, someone was standing there, not close, several feet back, just barely visible in the gloom. A tall figure, unmoving. At first I assumed it was a guard, but the longer I watched, the less sense that made. Guards don't just stand still like that. They walk, they check, they move on. This one didn't move. I blinked, leaned forward, pressed closer to the mesh screen. The light above me flickered once, casting a brief glow down the corridor. For that single second, I saw the figure more clearly. It was him, David Harker, the same face I'd seen on my roof, pale, slack, eyes too wide. He was staring straight at me. I staggered back from the door, my shoulders hitting the wall. My chest heaved. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, you're dead." I squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them again, the corridor was empty. Nothing stood outside, just the dim stretch of concrete and shadows. I laughed then, a dry, broken sound. Maybe I really was losing it, but the relief lasted only seconds, because from the corner of the room, near the drain in the floor, came a sound, drip, drip. I looked down. Water was seeping up through the metal grate, spreading slowly across the concrete. At first, it seemed harmless, a leak maybe, but the smell hit me almost immediately. It wasn't water, it was sharp, metallic, thick, blood. The dark liquid spread toward the bench, a thin sheet that reflected the dim light. My stomach turned as I backed away, pressing into the farthest corner. And then I heard it. From somewhere beneath the floor, carried up through the drain, came a voice. Low, familiar. "You can't hide from me." The liquid spread faster, rising to cover the drain completely. The smell grew stronger, filling the small cell. I banged on the door, shouting now, "Hey, someone! There's something in here!" Footsteps thundered down the corridor. The door swung open, 2 officers rushing in. "What's going on?" I pointed at the floor, my voice cracking. "The blood! It came up from the drain. It was right there. It was—" But the floor was dry, not a drop. The officers exchanged a look, the kind that carried silent judgment. One muttered, "He's cracking." The other pulled the door shut again, the lock snapping closed. I sank onto the bench, my hands trembling. And then, from the shadows of the corner, I heard the faintest sound, a wet breath, drawn in slow, followed by 3 words, whispered so close to my ear it made my skin crawl. "I'm in here." My breathing turned ragged. I pressed my palms against my ears, shaking my head like I could push the sound out of me. But the words had been too close, not through a vent, not from under the floor. This time, it was inside the room. I sat there for what felt like hours, back pressed to the wall, knees drawn up tight, my eyes darting between every corner, every shadow. The air felt heavier now, harder to breathe. At some point, the corridor outside grew quieter. I realized I hadn't heard any footsteps, any doors opening or shutting for a long time. The silence was so complete it was wrong, like the whole station had gone still. And then the light above me flickered. Once, twice. Then it dimmed to a faint glow, shadows stretching long across the floor. I froze. From the far end of the cell, opposite where I sat, a shape began to take form. At first, it was just a darker patch in the corner. Then it thickened, as though the shadows themselves were folding in on each other. A figure, tall, thin, bent slightly forward. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart slamming in my chest. It isn't there. It isn't there. But I couldn't stop myself. I opened my eyes again, and now it was closer, halfway across the cell. Its face was pale, its eyes wide and unblinking. It was David Harker, the same man who had been lifted off my roof that morning, the same man whose body should have been lying in the morgue. He didn't move like a person. He seemed to lean forward, and the space between us collapsed without him taking steps, like the air carried him closer. I scrambled backward, my hands clawing against the wall. "Stay away from me," I shouted, my voice cracking. He tilted his head, the same slow, unnatural tilt I'd seen on the street figure in Myrtle Beach years ago, the memory flashing through me like lightning. Then he opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Instead, a thick line of blood dribbled from the corner of his lips, trailing down his chin and onto his shirt. I gagged, pressing myself against the corner, wishing I could melt into it. The light above buzzed violently, flaring bright, then plunging the cell into near darkness. And just like that, he was gone. The silence crashed down again, heavier than before. I was shaking so badly my teeth chattered, my throat was dry, my head pounding. I thought of screaming again, calling for the guards, but what would I say? That a dead man was standing in my cell? They already thought I was losing it. I sank onto the bench, burying my face in my hands. I tried to count my breaths, to ground myself in something real. One inhale, one exhale, over and over. But then I felt it. The bench shifted beneath me. A tiny vibration, like someone had pressed their weight against the other end. Slowly, carefully, I lifted my head. The far corner of the bench was no longer empty. A hand rested there, pale, damp, the nails dirty. It curled slightly, the tendons twitching. And then the rest of him leaned forward into view. He was sitting beside me, close enough that if I reached out, my arm would brush his. His eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking, his face slack. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to run, to fight, to do something, but my body refused. Then, without turning his head, he spoke. His lips barely moved, but the words slid into the air between us like smoke. "They won't let you leave." I bolted from the bench, slamming against the door, my fists pounding the steel. "Help! Somebody help me!" I screamed, the sound tearing my throat raw. Footsteps pounded down the hall this time, rushing toward me. The slot in the door slid open, and a pair of eyes peered in. "What the hell's going on in there?" I whipped my head back toward the bench. It was empty. No hand, no figure. Nothing. Just me, my own ragged breathing, and the stench of blood that seemed to linger no matter how much I told myself it wasn't there. The slot slammed shut. The footsteps receded, and I was left in silence again. A silence I no longer trusted. I didn't sleep that night. The holding cell was small, cold, and the bench was nothing more than a slab of concrete. I lay there with my jacket rolled up under my head, but my eyes stayed open, fixed on the barred door. The station at night was quieter than I expected. Every now and then, a phone rang at the front desk, or a door slammed somewhere down the hall, but mostly it was silent. Too silent. The kind of silence where every sound feels louder than it should. What bothered me most wasn't the cell, or the cold, or even the fact that I was being held on suspicion of murder. What bothered me was the thought of that body. The image of it on my roof wouldn't leave my head. The way its face looked, slack, gray, and lifeless. And yet, those eyes. I kept seeing them blink in the back seat of the police car. Just once, but enough to burn itself into my memory. I tried telling myself I was overtired, that my brain had played a trick on me. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw them again. Not rolled back in death, not glassy and empty, but moving. Sometime around 3 a.m., one of the officers came by the cell. He was an older guy, heavy-set, with a coffee mug in his hand. He glanced at me and said, "You all right in there?" I just stared at him for a moment, then asked the only question that mattered to me. "Where's the body now?" He looked at me like he was deciding how much to say. Finally, he replied, "County morgue. They'll do a post-mortem in the morning." I nodded, but it didn't make me feel better. If the body was truly dead, I wanted it to stay there. Locked away, not moving, not blinking. But if I hadn't imagined it, if what I saw in the car really happened, then it wasn't staying anywhere. The officer lingered a second, then said quietly, "You're not the first one to ask about that." My head shot up. "What do you mean?" He shook his head quickly, as if he'd already said too much. "Get some rest," he muttered, and walked off down the hall. I sat there, wide awake, my chest tight. What did he mean, not the first? Had someone else seen something too? Another cop? Another suspect? The hours dragged. Every sound in the building made me jump. The jingle of keys, the squeak of shoes, even the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. By the time the faint gray light of morning began seeping through the tiny barred window, high on the wall, my nerves were raw. Then, just after sunrise, 2 detectives came to my cell, both in plain clothes, both with notebooks in hand. They unlocked the door and told me I was being taken out for further questioning. I didn't argue. I just followed, my legs heavy, my stomach hollow from not eating. But as they led me down the corridor, past the line of empty cells, I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. On the far wall, just before the hallway turned, there was a glass panel looking into the evidence room. Through it, I caught a glimpse of a black bag, long, zipped up, lying on a stretcher. A body bag. I froze. My chest tightened. It was him. I knew it. And in that split second, As one of the detectives urged me forward, I swore. I swore. I saw the fabric twitch, like something inside had shifted. The detectives didn't let me linger near the evidence room window. One of them touched my arm and guided me down the hallway with a firm grip, like he thought I might bolt. My legs felt like they weren't even under my control, just carrying me forward while my head spun. They took me into a plain interview room. White walls, a metal table, 2 chairs on one side, 1 chair on the other. I sat where they told me, my hands resting on the cold surface. The smell of the room was something I can't forget, bleach mixed with stale coffee. The older detective, a man in his 40s with thinning hair, sat across from me. The younger one leaned against the wall, notebook in hand. For a while, nobody spoke. I could hear the hum of the air vent overhead, and every second stretched. Finally, the older one said, "We need you to walk us through everything again, from the moment you found the body on your roof." So I told them, every detail I could remember, how I'd gone out back to check on the loose gutter, how something felt off, how I'd climbed the ladder, and there he was, flat on the shingles, eyes closed, arms stiff at his sides. The detective kept pressing. "Had you ever seen him before? Do you know his name? Why would he be on your roof?" I kept shaking my head. "I don't know him. I've never seen him in my life." I swear they scribbled notes, exchanged looks I couldn't read. Then the younger one asked me almost casually, "And in the patrol car? You said something happened?" My mouth went dry. I hesitated, then said it anyway. He blinked. I saw his eyes blink once. I know how it sounds, but I swear it happened. The room went still. Neither detective wrote anything. Neither smirked. They just looked at me with unreadable expressions. The older detective finally leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You're not the first person to say something like that." A chill swept over me. "What do you mean?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. He tapped his pen on the table, staring at the metal surface. Then, as if against his better judgment, he said, "There've been reports. Not often, not official, but a few cases where bodies weren't completely still." My stomach twisted. "So, you believe me?" He straightened suddenly, his expression shutting down. "We're not here to discuss that. We're here to find out why a dead man ended up on your roof." His tone was sharp now, final, like the door had closed on that part of the conversation. Before I could push further, someone knocked on the door. Another officer leaned in and said something quietly to them. Both detectives exchanged a look, then stood. "You'll need to come with us," the older one said. I followed them down another corridor, this one colder, the lights harsher. We passed through 2 locked doors, each opened with a keycard, until the air itself changed. It smelled different, thicker, heavier. We were in the morgue. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, reflecting off the steel drawers lined along the walls. In the center of the room was a metal table, already prepared, and on it, lying under a sheet, was a long, unmistakable shape. My chest tightened the second I saw it. The younger detective gestured. "That's him. We're about to start the autopsy." A man in scrubs, probably the medical examiner, stood nearby pulling on gloves. He gave me a quick glance, like he was curious why I was there at all, but didn't ask. The older detective looked at me. "We thought you should see this. Maybe it'll help you understand." My legs felt rooted to the floor, but my eyes were locked on the sheet. The examiner pulled it back slowly, revealing the face. Pale, still, exactly as it had looked on my roof. I let out a shaky breath, almost a laugh of relief. The eyes were shut, the mouth slightly open, nothing alive about it. But then the examiner leaned over with his penlight, lifting the lid of one eye to check the pupil. That's when it happened. The eye darted. Not much, just the faintest flicker, like it rolled to the side. But I saw it. The examiner froze, hand still holding the eyelid open. He looked at the detectives, then at me. Nobody said a word. The room had gone so quiet I could hear the buzz of the light above us. And in that silence, I realized something awful. I wasn't the only one who had seen it this time. The silence in the morgue was unbearable. Nobody moved for a few seconds after the eye darted. It was almost like All of us were waiting for someone else to explain it. The medical examiner finally cleared his throat, but his voice wasn't steady. Sometimes muscles twitch after death. It can look like movement. But even he didn't sound like he believed what he was saying. His hand, still holding the eyelid, was trembling. He let it go quickly, stepping back from the table. The detectives exchanged a glance. The younger one scribbled something in his notebook, but his face was pale, his jaw tight. The older one just stared down at the body, his arms crossed, lips pressed thin. I whispered, "You saw it too. Don't tell me you didn't." The older detective didn't answer. Instead, he gestured to the examiner. "Proceed." The examiner hesitated before pulling the sheet further down, exposing the torso. His gloves snapped as he adjusted them tighter, maybe to hide the fact that his hands were still shaking. He picked up a scalpel from the tray. The sound of the metal against metal, the clink, echoed through the room. He leaned forward, placing the blade against the skin just below the sternum. The first incision should have been routine, but the moment the blade broke the skin, the body jerked, not a twitch, not a reflex, a full, sharp movement, like the chest tried to rise. The scalpel slipped in the examiner's hand and clattered onto the table. Everyone froze. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to say something, scream, demand they stop, but my voice wouldn't come out. The examiner whispered almost to himself, "That's not possible." The younger detective stepped forward, voice hard, "Finish it." The examiner looked at him like he was insane, but with a shaky exhale, he picked up the scalpel again. This time, when he pressed down, the skin opened cleanly. Dark blood oozed out, thicker than it should have been after death. The smell filled the room immediately. Copper, rot, something sour that made my stomach lurch. And then, from the body's mouth, came a sound. A faint, low gurgle, like air escaping. The examiner dropped the scalpel again, stumbling backward until he hit the tray stand. His face was drained of color. No, that wasn't air. That wasn't... The older detective cut him off sharply. "Seal the room. Nobody leaves. Not yet." The younger detective locked the door behind us. I could hear the click of the mechanism, and it made my chest tighten even more. Trapped inside with whatever this was. I took a step toward the table despite myself. The sheet had slipped down further, exposing more of the body. My eyes were locked on the chest. It rose, not much, barely a fraction of an inch, but it rose. I stumbled back, knocking my chair over. "He's breathing," the older detective barked. "He's not breathing." His voice cracked on the last word. The examiner shook his head violently. "I've done hundreds of autopsies. I know the difference between gas escaping and lungs filling. That," he pointed with a shaking finger, "that was inhalation." We all stood there, the room heavy with dread. The hum of the fluorescent light seemed louder than ever, and then the body's eyes snapped open. Both of them, wide, unblinking, staring straight up at the ceiling. The examiner let out a strangled noise and stumbled toward the door, pounding on it even though it was locked. I couldn't move. My legs were rooted to the floor. The pupils in those eyes shifted slowly, deliberately, first up, then to the side, until they were looking directly at me. My stomach turned to ice. The younger detective whispered, barely audible, "What the hell are we dealing with?" Nobody answered. The body's lips moved. Not a word, not yet. Just the faintest quiver, like they were trying to form sound. And in that moment, I understood something that made my skin crawl all over. He hadn't been dead when I found him on my roof. At least, not in the way we think of dead. The morgue smelled faintly of disinfectant and something metallic. The examiner pulled on his gloves, while the two detectives stood near the wall, arms folded, their faces tense. The body lay on the steel table, pale and stiff. I couldn't stop staring at his face. Even though the skin had begun to lose color, there was still something sharp about his features, like he hadn't fully let go of life. The examiner leaned over, adjusting the light. He muttered something about standard procedure and then reached for his instruments. That's when it happened again. The eyes. I swear I saw them shift. A quick flutter, like the eyelids had tried to close but got stuck halfway. "Did you see that?" I blurted out, stepping back. The younger detective frowned. "See what?" His eyes, I said, my voice cracking. They moved. I saw them blink. The examiner paused, staring down at the body. For a moment, the room was dead silent, everyone straining to notice something. Then the examiner shook his head. It's just muscle release. Happens sometimes after death. Nerves can fire off randomly. But his tone was flat, unconvincing. Even he didn't believe what he was saying. I forced myself to step closer again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those eyes weren't just moving. They were looking at me. The older detective finally said, "All right, that's enough for tonight. We'll continue in the morning." His voice was steady, but I caught the quick glance he exchanged with the examiner, like they both knew something they weren't saying. As they began putting things away, I kept staring at the body. I couldn't stop. I needed to prove to myself that it was just my imagination. And then, so subtle I almost thought I imagined it, the lips twitched. Not a word, not a sound, just a twitch, like the beginning of a smirk. My stomach turned ice cold. I stumbled back, my chair scraping loudly against the tiled floor. He moved again. You all saw that. But no one answered me. The examiner kept his eyes down. The detectives looked at each other. None of them wanted to admit it. None of them wanted to say out loud what we had all just seen. Finally, the older detective walked toward me. He leaned in close, his voice low, almost like a warning. Whatever you think you saw, don't repeat it outside this room. Do you understand me? I opened my mouth to protest, but he cut me off. This case is already strange enough. If word gets out that the body was moving, you'll never walk free of it. People will say you're lying, or worse, that you had something to do with it. He stared at me for a long second, his eyes heavy, tired. Then he added quietly, "Go home. Leave town if you can. For your own good." I didn't argue. I couldn't. My throat was too tight to speak. That night, I packed a bag and drove. No destination, just miles of highway, headlights cutting through the dark. I told myself I'd never look back.